Think about the last time you shared good news with someone you considered a close friend. A promotion, a new relationship, a project that finally came together. Now think carefully about what happened in the 2 or 3 seconds before they responded. Was there a pause that lasted just a beat too long? A smile that arrived slightly late? An enthusiasm that felt assembled rather than spontaneous? Most people brush past that moment. They accept the congratulations, move on, and file the interaction as normal. But that fraction of a second tells a story. Because genuine joy is immediate. It doesn't require preparation. It doesn't need to be constructed. When someone who calls themselves your friend feels threatened by you, they don't disappear. They don't become openly hostile. What they do is more complicated and far harder to detect. They continue showing up. They continue using the word friend. But something underneath the surface has shifted. A quiet competition has begun that only one of you knows about. And the most unsettling part is this. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't change in any harmful way. You simply grew. You moved forward. You became more of what you were already becoming. For some people, that is enough to feel like a threat. What follows are the patterns that reveal it. Not obvious signs. Not dramatic gestures, the kind of signals that live in the texture of ordinary moments and that become impossible to ignore once you learn to read them. To understand why this happens, you have to understand something about how identity works inside a friendship. The people closest to us are not just emotional connections. They are mirrors. They reflect back a version of who we are. When one person in a friendship grows significantly, that mirror cracks. The reflection no longer matches. And for the person who hasn't moved, that crack can feel like an accusation. Your progress doesn't criticize them with words. It criticizes them with contrast. Psychologists call this social comparison. We evaluate ourselves not in absolute terms, but relative to the people immediately around us. When someone in your circle rises, your own position feels altered, even if nothing about you has actually changed. The threat was never really about you. It never is. It's about what your existence forces them to feel about themselves. And rather than face that feeling directly, most people redirect it outward. The patterns that follow are what that redirection tends to look like. The patterns. When your worst moments bring out their best. When something goes wrong for you, they are suddenly, effortlessly present. But when something goes right, the warmth cools. The presence shrinks. The response is adequate but hollow. This inversion is one of the clearest emotional signatures of threatened friendship. The person is not cruel. They are simply more comfortable with a version of you that needs them. A version that confirms the internal story they've been telling themselves. Your struggle restores a balance they can't create through their own effort. Your success disrupts it. If your worst moments bring out their best, and your best moments bring out their silence, that asymmetry is telling you something when they become the editor of your story. You mention a recent achievement and something subtle happens. They begin to reframe it, to contextualize it in a way that makes it smaller, more circumstantial, less a result of who you are. You got lucky. You had help. The timing was right. This isn't random commentary. It's a defense mechanism. Because if your success is about luck, it could have happened to anyone. But if it's about who you've become, that's more difficult to dismiss. Notice whether the version of you they present to the world is slightly smaller than the one that actually exists. They become the editors of your biography when doubt arrives at the worst possible moment. You've made a decision, a real one, something that required courage and clarity, and they appear, not to challenge it openly, but to ask questions. The words carry concern, but the timing is surgical. They arrive after the decision is made, but before it's executed. Genuine friends don't arrive at the moment of commitment to introduce fractures. When doubt is introduced at the moment of action, it isn't concern, it's interference. And the part of them generating it knows exactly what it's doing. When the friendship starts to feel like a ledger, everything becomes something to track. If you receive something, they note it. What they're tracking isn't transactions. They're tracking distance, the growing gap between where you are and where they are. In a competition, every step you take forward registers as a point against them. The gap itself feels like an injury when they need you to stay incomplete. There is a version of you they are comfortable with, the version that hasn't quite figured things out yet. When a friend needs you to stay incomplete in order to feel whole, that is not friendship sustaining itself. That is fear of change wearing the mask of loyalty. When growth is treated as abandonment, the moment you move forward, a quiet audition begins. They become more demanding of your time. more sensitive to perceived slights, more alert to signs that you might be pulling away or prioritizing other people or other things. On the surface, it looks like insecurity about the friendship. And in a sense, it is. But underneath, it functions as a test. Can I still pull you back? Does your growth mean I lose access to you? The irony is that the testing itself creates the very distance they're afraid of. The more they pull, the more they confirm a dynamic that eventually becomes exhausting to be around. Real friendship makes room for your evolution. It doesn't treat your forward movement as a form of abandonment. When someone interprets your growth as a withdrawal from them, they are revealing something important. They were comfortable with the relationship as it was, not necessarily with who you were becoming. And those are not the same thing. When the public version of you gets quietly edited. In a group, something shifts. The same person who speaks warmly of you one-on-one becomes slightly different when others are present. A joke at your expense that carries just enough edge. A story about you that emphasizes the wrong detail. A moment where they could have elevated you and chose instead to level the ground. But if anyone else criticizes you, they defend you with genuine feeling. This contradiction confuses people. It seems inconsistent, but it follows a clear internal logic. They need to hold two things at once: genuine care for you and relief at not being outpaced by you. In private, the care is dominant. In public, where comparison becomes visible to others, the relief needs somewhere to go. The small diminishments in groups are not cruelty. They are pressure valves. Quiet ways of restoring a balance they can only feel when others are watching. Notice who builds you up when the room is empty, and who finds subtle ways to shrink you when it isn't. When they mourn, the version of you that was easier to stand beside. This is the pattern that hides most effectively behind warmth and nostalgia. They talk about who you used to be, with a tenderness that at first seems touching. You've changed. You're not the same person I met. I miss the old you. And the words carry real feeling. They do miss something. But pay close attention to what exactly they're mourning, because in most cases, it isn't a version of you that was better. It's a version of you that was easier to be around, easier to feel equal to, less confronting to stand beside. Growth changes the shape of relationships. That's real, and sometimes genuinely painful for both people. But there's a meaningful difference between a friend who grieves the change while still choosing to grow alongside you, and one who uses the grief as a quiet argument for you to shrink back. When someone frames your evolution as a loss, ask yourself what exactly they've lost. Because if the answer is simply the version of you that hadn't yet become this, then their mourning isn't really about you. It's about everything you're becoming asks them to confront about themselves. How to respond without escalating. Recognizing these patterns doesn't call for confrontation. Most of the time it calls for something quieter and more difficult. A clear decision about what you're willing to carry. 3 things worth keeping in mind. First, separate the person from the pattern. Almost none of what's described here is conscious behavior. The friend is not plotting against you. They are struggling with something inside themselves, and you happen to be the mirror making it visible. That distinction matters for how you respond. Second, stop managing their comfort at the cost of your own movement. The instinct to share less, to downplay wins, to make yourself slightly smaller in order to keep the peace, teaches the wrong lesson to both of you. You are not responsible for how your growth lands in someone else's psychology. You are not responsible for how your growth lands in someone else's psychology. Third, let time and distance do the work that confrontation rarely can. Not every friendship survives growth. Some were built for a specific chapter. When that chapter ends, the relationship either evolves or it shows you its actual limits. Both outcomes tell you something true. The friendships that survive your growth are the ones worth everything. But they are earned, not assumed. They require 2 people genuinely secure enough to want more for each other than they want for themselves. That kind of friendship is rarer than most people admit. What we've covered today isn't a reason to become suspicious of everyone around you. It's a reason to become more honest about what you're actually experiencing in the relationships you already have. The discomfort you felt but never named. The small moments that didn't add up. The quiet exhaustion of being around someone who claims to support you but somehow leaves you feeling smaller. Now you have a language for it. Use it for clarity, not for blame. Because the goal was never to find enemies inside your circle. It was to finally see your circle clearly. Observe more, speak less, and watch who changes. If this reached something you felt but never been able to name, leave in the comments. I choose clarity. That's where everything begins.